Hi, Boosh here with a quick breakdown video for the changes that Ninja's getting in Dawntrail. The big headline change is that the speed buff that you get from Houghton is now simply a passive trait that you get at level 45. As a consequence of this, Armor Crush isn't needed to refresh the speed gauge, but to maintain the branching combo finisher path stuff so that you get both rear positionals and side positionals, they've introduced a new system. Now, when you perform Armor Crush, you gain 2 Kazumatoi stacks, up to a maximum of 5, and then when you perform AoE Edge, you consume one of these stacks for plus 16 potency. For the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to call these stacks Kunai stacks, because that's how they appear on the job gauge, and Kazumatoi is a bit hard to say frequently. Currently, you use AoE Edge and Armor Crush in a ratio of somewhere between 2.4 to 2.5, depending on things like downtime. The new system has a much stricter 2-to-1 ratio because you only ever want to use as many AoE Edges as you get Kazumatoi stacks. One other thing to note with this new system is that if you use an AoE Edge when you have no Kunai, it's a 60 potency loss, which is reasonably big. However, it is significantly less punishing than if you were to use AoE Edge when you needed to refresh with Armor Crush and you drop the speed buff. So if you compare them as rough equivalents, it's significantly less punishing to mess up which combo you do now. Houghton, given that it's no longer needed for speed buff, has been freed up to be an AoE attack. Now, it's an AoE attack on the target, and it grants the hide status that enables usage of Trick and Macery. Kind of an AoE version of Suiton, if you like. Alongside this change to Houghton, Trick Attack upgrades into Kunai's Bane, which makes it an AoE, which has more potency, has no positional requirement, and, just applies the debuff to everything that it hits. As well as these changes to Houghton and Trick Attack, Mug upgrades into Dokumori. At level 66 is when you get the first upgrade. This simply is the upgraded animation. They clearly have chosen to introduce it when you get the trait that gives Mug plus 14 Inki. Then at level 96, it provides a buff called a Higi buff that upgrades the next Bavakakra or Hellfrog medium to have additional potency. Now, one quick thing to note with the math for this and Macery is that there is no need to ensure that you use both buffs at the same time. Higi is always plus 170 on Bavakakra and Macery is always plus 150. It doesn't matter if they're split across 2 different Bavakakras, as long as both are within buffs like Trick Attack or Raider buffs. Finally, as the level 100 capstone ability, Tenchi Jin gets a powerful OGCD follow-up that has a powerful single target hit and then drop off, so it's useful for both single target and AoE. Let's talk about how these changes affect Ninja. First, covering single target. Previously, Ninja was kind of gross to play from level 45 to level 53 due to having no easy way to maintain the Houghton speed buff. What you would have to do is use a non-damaging GCD in Houghton to reapply the buff. At level 54, once you had Armor Crush, this improved significantly, right? You had an actual way to upkeep it. But there would be situations in which it would drop off, which would be kind of annoying. Death being the most obvious one, but also tanks pulling without a countdown, or fights with very long cutscenes where you don't have control of your character. Examples of this include Eden Prime and Perfect Alexander from the Epic of Alexander. To alleviate this, Hyraijin was introduced in Endwalker. This was essentially an emergency valve of like if you died or if there were cringe cutscenes or tanks pulling or whatever, you would insta get 60 seconds of the speed buff. It existed to solve the problems mentioned previously, but now that the speed buff has been reworked into a trait, all these issues are completely circumvented. So there is no need for Hyraijin, which means that a hotbar space has been freed up. Overall, I think these changes are reasonable and like fairly decent for single target. The new Kunai gauge system encourages that gameplay loop of managing a resource and that resource management dictating some positional stuff. There is a slight loss of gameplay complexity at the higher end in planning around downtime. As examples, Sanctity of the Ward in DSR, because the downtime is so long, you actually want to use Houghton during Sanctity after the dash and bonk, but before the meteors start dropping, so you don't have that sort of thinking and planning to do anymore. Another example would be something like Limit Cut in P12S, where you want to ensure that you going into limit cut on an armor crush so that you have full gauge or close to full gauge, and you come out the other side with just enough to either get a 1-2-3 combo off to refresh the buff before it drops, or you can buy a bit of time by using like Phantom Kamaidachi off of Bunshin. So it's not that there's no loss with this change, but I think it's important to note what has been gained and how that weighs up. And I think like there is significantly more gain to the changes than there is like loss from downtime planning. The old system had all these ugly aspects, particularly in the leveling stuff where you didn't get armor crush until 54. Now you alleviate a lot of that, and you also free up Huton as a Muja finisher to do something else. And I don't think the gameplay loop should feel all that different for single target. We'll see how much I actually miss the timer management side of stuff after doing the first Savage tier and the first Ultimate, but I suspect things should mostly feel the same, so I'm fairly optimistic about it from a single target perspective. As for how these changes affect AoE though, I think it is just overwhelmingly positive. It's like a big win for Ninja. Previously, when doing dungeons on Ninja, you had this issue where you wanted to use your 2-minute buttons on cooldown in Trash, but you would have no way of using or generating the ability to use some of them. So there would be no good way to set up Trick Attack, and also no really good way to spend it. Like, you would spend it because single target use would be a gain and it would keep it aligned, but, you know, even if you could generate like a Sweet On type buff, Trick wouldn't be that good to use. Similarly for Meisui, you couldn't generate the sort of Sweet On type buff, so you can choose to activate it productively, and your Tenchi Jin ended in a Doton rather than the Sweet On, so it wouldn't generate from that either. So you would end up with this weird situation where you would come around to the boss, and Trick would often be, well, Trick and Meisui would often be misaligned with things like Kasatsu and Tenchi Jin. Another more minor criticism of Ninja currently in dungeons is Mug feels kind of bad, since it's supposed to be a more raid buff type effect, and it effectively gives you 40 Ninki, which is like 4/5 of a Health Rock medium, right? With the changes they've made, Trick now being AoE actually makes it useful to use, and we have a good way to set it up. This should mean that Ninja feels a lot better in Trash. Also, because of the Huton change, Meisui can be used for a slight gain. Like, if you Huton Meisui, that is a gain over just Katon. You also get Mug upgraded. It's functionally not much of a change from like what buttons you press, right? Because it is still 4/5 of a Health Rock medium. But given that it's a buffed Health Rock medium and the gain is significant, it feels like a substantially better payoff for actually using. So I think that is, from a sort of feels good, feels bad type perspective, a nice little improvement. One more subtle benefit of this change to the Huton is that we now have flexibility in our Tenchi Jin paths for AoE, because currently we have to, for Tenchi Jin to be productive in AoE, end on a Doton, right? Because Sweet On is single target, Huton does no damage. So this kind of creates some problems, right? Because currently you want to set up Doton before doing other AoE skills, so that when you use those other AoE skills, you summon little snaky boys that do a bit of extra damage. What this means is, typically, because TCJ ends on Doton, you don't want to Doton beforehand, because if you Doton and then TCJ and then that ends in a Doton, you overwrite the old Doton, so it's kind of wasted. What this means is that Katon from TCJ doesn't benefit from the snaky boys, because the Doton comes after. It also means that as the trash is gathered up to its final place, you want to TCJ, so that the Doton is dropped on them and then you dump everything into it, which can be a bit of a problem, right? Because Tenchi Jin locks you in place and you cannot move without cancelling stuff. So if you have a bad tank that after they reach the last pack continues pulling, despite there being no further enemies, you can be locked in place, set up your Doton, and it's just like, oh, well, I guess they're being pulled out of it. Or like you have to run to catch up and then stuff gets cancelled. Now you have the flexibility in two axes, right? Of you can both choose, like if you plot down TCJ and you see that the tank continues pulling, you can opt to change your TCJ so it's the Shuriken, Katon, and then Huton. Because Huton's also thrown like Katon, so if they run ahead, it's like, okay, well, I could still hit them and then I can like Shikuchi towards them, right? But even outside of that, if your tank's being sensible and stuff, what it means is that you can run into the pack prepping Doton, so that you can keep moving, and then if there is slightly awkward movement or positioning with the tank, like they pull a little bit more than they should, like distance wise, you can hold off for like a second and run ahead and then drop the Doton or something. So then if you do the Doton with the normal movers first, that's a nice little benefit in that now your TCJ Katon benefits from Snaky Boys. Another minor thing, and this is relatively minor, is currently when the tank pulls the first group of trash, you want to start using Mudras immediately. Not all of them, but you want to use one stack so that you're not overcapping, right? What this currently means is that you use Katon, because what else are you going to use? Which means you're only hitting the first group, which can be like 3 or 4 anyways, which kind of feels like a little bit of a waste, but it's still better to do that than like just overcap for like 10-20 seconds. What you can do now though is instead of using Katon, you can use Huton, which is weaker, and it still feels a little bit bad because it's an AoE that's only hitting like 3 or 4 people, but it preps you for trick. So what you can then do is, rather than having to do a Huton later, you can trick as soon as everything's gathered up. You can like prep Doton, drop Doton, trick Katon into TCJ or something. So yeah, overall for dungeon content, I think this will actually massively improve how Ninja feels to play. With the single target side of stuff, I imagine it will mostly play the same, but it will iron out some of the ugly bits of Ninja's current toolkit, especially at lower levels. But yeah, overall, to me at least, it seems like Ninja is somewhat of a winner when it comes to Dawntrail, which can't be said for every job, unfortunately. But yeah, as a Ninja main, that is my thoughts on the changes that Ninja's getting with the tooltips that have been released. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to drop a like or subscribe. I'll probably be making more of these sorts of videos with jobs that I have some sort of personal stake in. If you think I missed anything, like if you think there were any oversights of like really important stuff, please comment. I think like there'll probably be some minor potency stuffs that I overlooked, but I think for general gameplay loop and feel, I think I've covered everything important. And yeah, with that said, thanks for watching, and hopefully I will see you in the next one.